think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. 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 girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done.
Hello.
Hello, hi again.
I'm good. How's
Yeah,
everyone today?
yeah, we are great. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So, can you tell us how are you going to conduct the workshop? Like, what will be your flow so that we can approach accordingly. Should we take the question and answer in the end, or we can take the question and answer
Yeah, Kim, it's fine now. We can start.
All right.
Sorry for the delay.
No problem. So I was talking about, let me just back up a little bit in case you didn't hear what I was saying. So my name is Ken Lane. I'm Chief Evangelist for Postman, and my role is to help light the fire under your imagination about what is possible with Postman, but more importantly for me, what is possible with APIs in general. And APIs are something everyone should be aware of, developers and non-developers, because they are literally beneath everything that we depend on each day to power our mobile and web applications. So I started doing what I do about 10 years ago, around 2010, as I saw an explosion of APIs occurring, and I wanted to understand more. But today you can see there's a lot of APIs out there. There's APIs behind every big tech brand that we know about. And most of these APIs are publicly accessible and available for us to play with. So all of this is, there's been 3 shifts that have been occurring that has led to all of this. So around 2008, we had everything moving from our desktop or our mobile laptop applications to our mobile phones. So we got iPhone and we got Android. All of that is API driven. And then along the way, companies wanted to change how they build software. And rather than building big, large, monolithic software, they started building little microservices or individual APIs that can be used to drive these mobile applications, but also web and increasingly device applications. And then the third big shift was moving from on-premise into the cloud, which everything in the cloud is API driven. Amazon began in 2006 with their storage and their compute platforms, but now there's a whole wide range of API driven services that you can use as part of the cloud. So it was these 3 shifts that really led to where we're at here in 2020 with all the APIs and with Postman that allows us to be able to play with these APIs. But as Chief Evangelist, I'm really just a developer. So I don't like spending a lot of time in PowerPoint decks. I would prefer to just exit and go straight into Postman where I'm the most comfortable. So let me zoom in a little bit so you guys can maybe see, whoops, let's go a little bit less, see on the screen here. So we're I'm in my Postman client here. Think of Postman as a browser for APIs. It's a little different different behavior than you would get from your regular Chrome or Firefox browser, but it's going to show you a lot more information behind the scenes. And you can use Postman to just browse the web if you wanted, but you're not going to see it like you would in a browser. You're gonna be able to play with everything that's going on behind the scenes with a website or with APIs. So the best place to start is, if you're not familiar with Postman, is we have a public REST API collection. So first, I guess I kind of jumped the gun here, is you should, head to Postman. If you're not, you're welcome to follow along. You can go to Postman, you can click download here, and you don't even have to sign up if you don't want to. You can just use Postman without actually having an account. But it helps if you want to set up an account and be able to save things and do a little bit more collaboration and work with your team. So I've already got Postman downloaded here. And one of the things you can do when you first start, if you don't have any of these collections of APIs, I recommend you heading over to our our network. So you can click on the new button here at the top, and then the API network. There's a whole bunch of different APIs that you can play with here from different companies. For this demo, I'm going to be using our public API REST. See, there's quite a few of them here. Didn't used to be this many. Where did it go? Let me see. Public REST. Wow, not filtering very well. Why is not the search not working very well? Well, let's just go to the web. That's a shame. Our let's see if it's going to work better here on the web. Public SOAP APIs, somewhere here should be our public REST APIs. And I'm gonna have to talk to the team about that search. That's a little frustrating that the search isn't filtering it a little bit better. Let's see if we can't find it here. Come on, this is ridiculous. Well, that's not very helpful, am I? Every other time I've done this demo, it shows up top search. So apparently it's not finding my collection. So I apologize for that, but I will make sure it gets in there and you can easily find it. But what I have here is, I'm gonna go ahead and star it and pop it up top here. What I have here is a REST collection. This is a collection of APIs that are publicly available and allow you to make calls to a variety of APIs to kind of show you the diversity of APIs that are out there. So we've broken them down into folders. You can get to APIs by different types. If you want to learn about drones, you want to learn about earthquakes, you want to learn if you want something with jokes. There's quite a few jokes you can find in there. But basically, when you want to make a call to any of these APIs, let's do sunrise and sunset. When I click on this request, it's going to open it up similar to a browser. Look at this. I've got a tab here, similar to my browser. I've got a URL that I can make a call to. But this is where you're going to start seeing a lot more information in here that you won't see in your browser. So you'll be able to change what your HTTP method or your verb is, because most API calls you're making on the web are a GET. But Postman lets you then control that and be able to change it. The second most common method that people submit on the web is POST. So like you're posting a form, a contact submission, you're posting something on a photo on Instagram. A post is the second most common, but there's a lot of other methods that you can use when you're actually using or building APIs. This is one of the more simple APIs, and it allows us to change the latitude and longitude of where we would like to know the sunrise and sunset. And so for this API request, I'm going to hit send over here. And you're going to be able to see the sunrise, sunset for this longitude and latitude. And I'll get back to JSON. So there's a whole bunch of different APIs you can play with here to see how Postman works. And what's special about these APIs is none of them require authorization, meaning they're publicly available, they're easy to access. Because if you've played with APIs before, you know they can be sometimes they can be difficult to get up and running and doing what you want them to do. And that's what Postman is for, is to really allow you to understand, play with, debug, try to figure out APIs, because a lot of APIs just aren't well documented. And Postman lets you kind of kick the tires, understand what's going on, change values, see what's working and see what's not working. And it gives you all of these knobs and dials you can turn to be able to start figuring that out. You can adjust the headers if you want. You can see what headers are being passed back and forth. Headers are right beneath the surface of every website that we load, every web page that we load. But in a browser, you really don't see headers. And so Postman gives you visibility into those headers. And then it also gives you access to authorize and deal with authorization when you need it. We don't need it for this particular request because it's publicly available. So, if I want to pull another API, I can pull the latest Bitcoin price. There's the latest Bitcoin price for July 11th. I can pull things on books, bikes, anything that interests me. There's an API out there to get you interested. So you can find the public REST API collection, hopefully, in the template gallery. I'll make sure, actually, I'll show you. I wasn't planning on demoing this, but let's make sure it's actually published to the gallery, because that's something that happens occasionally. Let me hit edit the settings. And that looks like it could be the problem. No, it's already published. I may have to just talk to my team about why it's not listing, because it looks like it should be available. So if you have any problems getting to that collection, let me know. I'm happy to help you find it. We actually just did a story on it, so probably your best bet to find it is if you go to blog.postman. Here's this collection is the top story. So you can actually find it here on our blog if you would like to follow along. It might make it a little easier. So that's a really basic collection that kind of can introduce you to what Postman's all about, allow you to play with a variety of APIs, and helps you understand Postman as what we'd call an API client, or as I said, an API browser, letting you play with different APIs and see what's possible. Now let's bump that up a little bit and go to a little bit more complex of an API, but one that many of you will probably know. So the Twitter API. So the Twitter API has their own documentation, and you can play with many different APIs here to be able to work with Twitter. Now, what we've done is we've worked with Twitter to create a collection, and they have their own collection in the Postman network, but we've recently built one around our COVID-19 resources. So if you want to get access to this collection, just type in COVID-19 Postman, and we have a whole list of resources here for COVID-19. These are all collections that you can just run in your Postman if you would like to find different COVID-19 related searches. There's COVID-19 data across the world, including quite a few from India that have published data. And so you can get in here and start playing with actual COVID-19 data. But the one that I'm going to show you is one I created earlier on. You can find it down here towards the bottom. But some common COVID-19 searches. So if you want that collection, you can find it here. But this is just a handful of searches for searching Twitter, which have a little more robust querying capacity. So this allows me to search, and I'll note this is version 2 of the API. So this is actually in labs. And the version 2 of the API is not entirely, it's public and it's available, you can use it, but it's not in production 100% yet because they're still making changes to it. Excuse me. So the Twitter API has authorization. It requires us to authorize and log in using our account information. And so this gives you an example of how we can, we'll have to authenticate with some APIs. And it's common for them to use what's called a bearer token. And this is part of OAuth, which is an authentication mechanism that Twitter and many other providers use. And you need a bearer token. So this collection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our subscribers was asking, like, are all these APIs that you were showing about COVID, are they free to use?
Yes. Yeah. So all of these APIs, the public ones especially, are all free to use and publicly available. Twitter's API is publicly available and mostly free to use. You can be able to make calls to the Twitter API within a certain limitation. Once you go over a certain amount, they have a commercial tier that you can use to pay Twitter to get large amounts of data. But you have to be using it quite a bit. I've never actually paid Twitter money, and I've used them quite a bit. So the Twitter API is a free public API, but you do have to sign up and you do have to authorize to be able to use it. And most of these APIs are free. Facebook, Instagram, there's plenty of APIs out there that you can use that are freely available, but you will need to sign up for an account. So if you're going to use the Twitter API, I've already set up, because I didn't want to go through the process, you have to set up what's called an app in Twitter. So I have a handful of apps that I use. And when you set up these apps, you're then given some credentials that you can use to authorize. And so I'm not going to click in because I don't want to show you my credentials, but I've taken those credentials and I've put them into a single auth request. And I was given an API key and a password when I signed up for my application. I put those in here. And then when I hit send, I get back a token. It generates a token for me. And I'm going to go ahead and generate this token because I'll clean it up after I'm done. But it just generated this access token for me right here. And what I did with this request is I have a test script at the end, a script that all it does is it grabs that value of that body that got returned, grabs that token, and then it adds it to what is called my environment. This is my environment up here in the top right corner. So I'm able to actually store those tokens here so that I can use them across different searches and different API calls that I'm making. And so all this is doing is grabbing that token and then storing it for me so I can use it later as this variable. So it's going to set it and call it bearer token, because when I come down here and I want to make my COVID-19 search, and then I look at the authorization tab, it needs that bearer token, and here it is. You can see there's the value, and it's getting it from up here in my environment. Okay, and now I should be able to hit send, and I should actually be, excuse me. Let me click back to parameters. When I hit send, I can actually see tweets. Get a better, it's not allowing me to show my screen the way I want. There we go. So what I'm showing you here is just the data that's returned from the Twitter API. And this is a listing of tweets. You know, it's not very easy to see, but here's a tweet. You can see the text, you can see the ID, you can see who the author was and when this tweet was created and the language this tweet is in. And so there's quite a bit of data here about each of these tweets. And so now I can make calls to it. This one in particular, if you look up here, what I'm doing is I'm getting from this API call. This is the URL for the Twitter search. So it's api.twitter.com search. And then I've got a bunch of parameters that get set in. But those parameters are just listed here. And Postman lets me adjust those and play with those and change what they are. So I can add in new queries if I want. I can choose which fields I want to be returned. I chose that I want that created at author language. I wanted those fields. So Twitter gives you the ability to decide what fields you wanna send back with your request. if you're looking for something different. It also has, these are checked out or they're not selected, but there's all these other fields that you can choose to change what data you get back from the Twitter API. So I can choose a start time and end time if I want to return a set of tweets between a certain time. I can choose different fields that I want that are media related. Here's a media fields. This will return images, videos, and other things related to a tweet. So you can really start configuring exactly what you want to see when it comes to the Twitter API. And this is really where Postman excels in allowing you to just change values, understand what's possible, and then just see what you get back. See if, you know, when you want to do different searches. And what I've done here is I've done a handful of different searches for common terms that people are using when they're talking about COVID-19. So I did COVID-19 and I copied and created a new request. And all I'm doing is just changing this one value here, COVID-19. So say I want to do an entirely new request. I can duplicate this down here. I'm going to rename it, and we're just going to call this, you know, this is a test. And I can search, you know, for whatever I want. You know, I can search for any query I desire, and it gives me back the results that I want. And I can search the event, and I can start being able to find different things about these tweets. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the Twitter, the version 2 of API, is if you scroll up, you have these what's called context annotations that come back with each tweet. And this will return natural language processing or machine learning that tags each tweet based upon what it is. This is, they've labeled it lifestyle, hobbies and interests, visual arts. So they give you ways of understanding the context or the meaning behind what is going on. So that's an example, just one of the API calls you can make to the Twitter API. There's a whole bunch more that you can make, and Twitter has its own Postman collection that you can use, or you can just make changes here as you're looking to make the API. So that's an example, gives you a walkthrough. You have a bunch of public APIs that you can play with just to understand what APIs are all about. But then Twitter, there's a lot more that you can do when it comes to actually playing with the Twitter API. If there's other APIs you would like to learn from, I recommend just clicking on the new, clicking on the API network, and you can see there's quite a few here. Imgur, I don't know how you pronounce that, but a funny image site. Foursquare, there's quite a few business applications, but you can start finding APIs in different categories of different interest levels here, and you can start navigating here. The difference between what's in the API network and what's under templates is templates are a little bit little simpler. They're usually one type of search or one little task that you want to do. So let's just to show you, there's a lot of different APIs that you can play with. And visualizer, if you search for a visualizer, there's a lot of interesting API calls that you can make. I'm going to choose visualizer examples. So this shows you how the network works. You can click on any of these that you find. This is a visualizer example, and I can click run in Postman right here. And what this does is it opens up this collection in your Postman. I'm going to go ahead and just show you how that works. So that just imported it in. And you look right here on my left, I now have a visualizer example. So I have 2 requests in here. I'm going to close out my Twitter request just so I don't get too messy of a screen here. And I have 2 requests. I'm going to make a call to this URL. Let's hit send. And similar to the Twitter API, this doesn't require authorization. This is a free API call, public API. But I get back some JSON here, just like I did with Twitter. And this shows you, each API call that I make is I can change aspects of the request here at the top. This gives me full control over, as I said, the HTTP method, the parameters, the authorization, the headers. I can write scripts. And once I hit this send button, this lower part is all the response from that API. So this is what Postman really does, is it gives you full control over the request as well as the response for each API. And you can see, things like how long it took, the time. We give you a lot of network information on what gets returned, as well as we give you back the JSON here that you can see. The problem is when you're not a developer, what do you do with JSON? How do you work with it? If you're a developer, you can save this and you can write some other code to work with it. You can write some scripts here in Postman to play with it. And one of those scripts that you can play with is what's called visualizer. So in this test script, here's a whole bunch of scripts. And what this does is it visualizes that JSON as just an HTML table for me. So what it's doing is that script grabs the JSON response that we saw over here, and then all it does is just forms it as an HTML table and then renders it to a visualizer. So this allows you to visualize API responses and see them. And so you can, as a developer, you can make collections that make calls to certain APIs and then return data and then visualize it and then save this as a collection. And you can then share this collection either by publishing it to another workspace, embedding it on a website, or you can just grab the link for it and give it to someone else. You can just email this to them and then they can run this. And when they click on that link, it'll give them the option to load this in their Postman. They can just hit send and they can visualize this data. And I know a lot of companies that have development teams that pull data from various APIs, visualize it, and then give these collections to non-developers. And the non-developers just run them and see the data that they need to see. So this doesn't have to just be a table. You can run any JavaScript library that you want in here. Here's another quick example. If I click on the bar chart here, click send, I get back JSON, but if I click on the visualize, I get a bar chart. So this gives me another way of visualizing data. So really, there's no limitation on what you can do. But to be able to create these, you need to be able to, be proficient in JavaScript, and then be not afraid to get in over here and work on the test script side of things. And then if you're wanting to write scripts that manipulate these responses, you can put these here. We give you a bunch of snippets, and there's a place you can learn more about test scripts and how they work. But you can also write what's called a pre-request script, and this runs right when you hit send. So as soon as I hit send, this JavaScript will run. As soon as that response comes back, this JavaScript runs, and then I can manipulate the responses. So Postman gives you full control over defining your request and then running scripts on a pre-request or a post-request as a test script, allowing you to manipulate those results and show them as a visualization. Or as I showed you with the bearer token example, you can grab all or part of the response and you can save it in your environment, which means you can then use those values for other API calls. And that's a more advanced concept called API chaining, where you can make one API call, save the results in your environment, grab those values, and make another API call using those values. And so there's lots of examples of how you can do that. You can pull a tweet on a certain topic or a list of tweets, store those tweets in your environment, and then you can make a call to publish them to a Google spreadsheet using the Google Sheets API. So there's a lot of examples of how you could do that. But that gives you a little look at, you know, the many different ways that you can use Postman to make API calls, but then also work with the responses and do what you want. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask you, what would you guys like to learn next? I can show you other APIs to make calls, or, you know, I haven't shown you really the advanced features of Postman for building APIs, because Postman is not just a client in a browser for existing APIs. It's a tool for building APIs. And most of what I've shown you now is just consuming APIs, finding existing public or private APIs and how you can use them. Would you guys like to learn about more APIs, or would you guys like to learn about building APIs? Any thoughts? No? Well, I'm going to decide for you if you don't. Well, I will show you how to build APIs then. I don't know your guys' skill levels, but I'm going to make some assumptions that maybe you're going to want to not just use APIs, but you're going to want to build APIs. And you're probably a developer, but you know, I've known people who are not developers who will build APIs as well. So let's change accounts. So what I'm going to do up here. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we have got a few requests to, like, you know, people want to learn about how to build API.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy to hear that. So so I'm going to switch accounts, and I'm going to go to a separate account. I have set up a separate team, and I'm going to choose my workspace. I have quite a few workspaces here, but one of them is I'm building a products API. Okay, so I want to actually build an API that will store my products. Very common use case. And so I'm in Postman here, and you can click on the API tab, which is right here. I'm going to work with some collections in a little bit, but I'm going to click on APIs, and this is my products API. And so I've got this kind of overview dashboard that gives me details about what's going on with my API. But if you click on define, this is where all APIs, start. So APIs, most modern APIs are built or defined using what's called an API specification. In this case, it's Swagger or Open API. You may have heard the term Swagger out there. You can use Swagger, which is technically Open API 2.0. It's had a name change over the years, so it's a little confusing. But Open API 3 is the most current version of that specification. And what Open API 3 is it describes the surface area of your API, all the details of it, the paths, those HTTP methods that I talked about, post, put, delete, get, and then what your API does and all the details of the response. And I'm not going to go through all the details here, but an Open API definition describes every detail of the request and the response of your API. And we use it because it allows us to empower developers to design and mock and build APIs without actually writing code. You can build an API in here and you can mock it without ever actually writing any code. But once you actually want to bring it into production and use it, you probably should know a little bit about how to write code and make it work for real. But this gives us the basic definition. And then what I can do is I can choose to generate collections from this. So why would I want to generate a collection? Well, I've already generated a handful of collections, and rather than having collections that call an existing API, like I showed you with Twitter and those other free ones, I've actually generated a collection. Here's my endpoints. It allows me to get products. It allows me to get an individual product, update, delete, and add products. So this is what's considered your basic CRUD functionality. I can create, I can read, I can update, and I can delete, also known as CRUD. So this gives me the basic capabilities that I need for my API. And so I generated this collection. I ended up with this collection here. And I'm going to use this to publish a mock server. So I've already done it, but all you do to do that is you say mock this collection. And what it does is it will create a mock server for this collection. And it'll take all the requests and the responses and that you've defined as part of this open API, and it'll publish it as and mock that API. So I should be able to actually make calls. Let me load up my parameters. There we are. I can actually make calls to this and see mock responses. So these are actually defined as examples as part of this collection. So I'm looking at this collection here. If you look up here in the top right corner, there's what's called examples here. And all it is a listing of JSON, and you can choose what parameter is selected when this JSON shows, and you can add as many examples as you want to this. And those examples are just going to be taken by Postman and used for the mock responses. So if I wanted to change and have many different responses, I could add 5 or 6 examples and then decide what query parameters need to be changed to show each of those examples. And so this actually allows me to mock my API and actually make changes to it, republish the mock, and then let other developers see what I mean when I want this API to work. And so that's the first collection I generated. The second collection I generated is for documentation, because this will power my mock server. This will power my documentation. And so here, I just choose to publish docs. And I showed you a little bit of this before when I was trying to figure out what was wrong with that REST collection. But once I publish it, I'm given a URL here to my documentation. And I should be able to see the documentation for my products API. It automatically documents everything for me. I put in these title and descriptions, but it gives all those examples that I showed. It creates full-blown documentation, and it generates different code snippets, PHP, curl, Python, all types of, if you want to make calls to this API. And then it gives me a run in Postman button. So all I need to do when I want to make a new API is in my Postman, add this open API definition, generate a collection, publish it as documentation, and then I just grab that URL and I can give this to someone else, and they then can run this in their own environment and see what I intended this API to do and to work. And so that gives me the ability to mock, to define my API, to mock it, to document it. And then I'm also I want to test this API, because if you're building a good API, you should always make sure every path does what it's supposed to do. And I generated a third collection here, and I'm going to do what I consider contract testing. And so for contract tests, this is where we start using those test script environments again. So when this response comes back, I'm going to run this set of scripts to test a variety of things. I'm going to test that it has a body, that it has a valid status code, that it has a valid JSON, that the JSON response matches, and I've got quite a bit of code in here to help me do this. And so I'm going to hit send. And when I get back, whoa, excuse me, accidentally clicked on that link. When I get back my response here, I get back this JSON. If you look, there's another little test results pane here as part of my response. So I showed you the visualizer. There's a test results. And what this is this is the results of my scripts here. There's the first one. Let's go back up to the top here. So is it a valid, that comment is incorrect. Is it a valid 200 status?
Kim,
Yeah.
hello. Yeah, so Vijay is asking, can we host the APIs directly from Postman and use it in our projects?
Yes, you can build that using this model here. You can mock, you can define, you can mock, document, and share and collaborate around APIs without incurring any cost. You don't actually have to have a host to host them. These are not production ready APIs yet. To make it production ready, you would need to take another step and actually deploy the API. But for your projects, yeah, this is perfect. This is a perfect environment for your teams to define an API, to mock and document it, and then play with it, and then give it to each other to be able to see the results and be able to use it in your project. So it's perfect for school projects. And so, so the testing allows me to just make sure that my API is always doing what it should, because if it does not do something that it should do, these will not pass these tests, and I will be alerted that one of my say we changed the mock, one of the responses during our project work, and we changed it. Our tests don't work now. One of them fails. And so this helps us really understand whether we're making breaking changes for our customers or what's happening. So that really gives you a look at kind of the full how to deploy an API, at least for your projects or for development purposes. Is you can create a workspace. I've created one called products. I've added an API definition using OpenAPI. I've generated a collection to mock it, to document it, and to test it. I've got two others here. I have one that measures the performance of my API, and I have one that does some basic security scans of it. So I'm able to basically mimic everything that I would do in the real world with an API. And I can also, if I want, I can sync this. Whoa, I didn't want you to load. I just wanted to show. You can actually just sync this to GitHub if you want. I can sync this API definition so it can be used by other team members as well in their Postman or in another product or service. So that should give you a quick introduction to how you can mock and work with APIs. If you want to play with any of those, this project that I just showed you, it's all a reference implementation that I created for demos. It's called Union Fashion, and you can go to the website union.fashion. You can click on the developers area. Here's all of the mock APIs that I've created. And any of these, if you want to play with, here's all the run in Postman buttons. But all of this is available on GitHub. If you just click on the GitHub icon at the top, all of these projects, the APIs, are all available in their own repos. If you click on the home repo, this tells you all about Union Fashion, has a walkthrough, talks about, it's a make-believe company that we created a bunch of fake APIs for. And you're welcome to learn from it. You're welcome to grab all of these collections, grab the APIs. It's all there to help you understand how to use APIs or build APIs. And so it should give you a little example in how it all works. If you have any questions, people are just asking questions via the GitHub issues here on the projects. So if you can't find something, if something doesn't make sense, because it's always changing and always moving, you can just ask a question here, and I'm happy to help out. So all of those examples are here. So hopefully that shows you not just how you can use Postman to make calls to APIs, but you can actually build APIs here, mock them, and use them as part of your projects. So with that said, I think we've gone almost an hour, but not quite. Happy to answer any questions, talk about any other topics you guys want that are of interest.
Yeah, hey Ken. I have some questions that like people ask in the comment section. Okay, so first question is from Kanak. He's asking which method should you prefer, JavaScript or functional, to write the tests?
So say the question. And so what type of
Like should we use JavaScript or functions to write the test?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so all the tests are JavaScript. This is just basic JavaScript. It's Node.js because it's running server side. But yes, it's all just JavaScript in here. And there are some limitations because we do sandbox it a little bit so people can't do malicious things. But you can get away with quite a bit in here. And all of those scripts are available here. But yes, pre-request scripts and post-request scripts are all just JavaScript. So it should be fairly familiar.
Okay. So next question, yeah, thank you for the last question. And next question is, can we have two global scope variables with the same name in Postman?
Ask one more time. Ask the question one more time.
Yeah. Can we have two global scope variables with the same name in Postman?
So you can store variables here in environments, and then you can store them in global variables. And so you have globals, and you can set globals here, and you can set environment variables. You can set those here. So no, your variables need to be unique within one environment. So, but you can have common variables across multiple environments that you're using across multiple APIs. So it can, it gets pretty complex pretty quick, but this is your key, your variable name, and the globals operate similarly. Those need to be unique. So within this environment or within your globals, so Postman can call that and use that. Now, how you use those variables across multiple APIs, whether you have a common set of globals that you're using or a common set of environments, that's the real power of using them. But they do have to be unique in the context of one environment. Hope that helps.
Yeah, so next question is, how can we set the environment variables, and like not every time we'll have to enter the URL of the APIs?
Sure. So yeah, anything you you want to set, you can grab a variable and you can set it. Here's a quick snippet. So whatever you want to give your variable name, here's the var, you set it, and here's whatever the value is that you want to set it to. You can set this in a pre-request, or you can set it in a post-request script from some value you got back in the response. And when I set this, it'll be set in my environment. Now, then I can use that variable anywhere that I want. All I have to do is just type it in there. This won't actually resolve to anything. It'll tell me it's unresolvable. But you can set those variables, you can set them manually. So if I wanted to come up here and get in my environment, which one am I in? This one. And I wanted to set, my var name equal to whatever. I can manually set these, and I can hit update, and I can come back here, and my variable now has a value. Now, when I run this, and my test script, I'm going to set var name to, new value. And let's hit send. See what it shows here. So see, it set my var name to equal new value now. So I was able to just set that in a script. but then wherever I use that variable, it will be that variable value. So you can set that variables manually, you can set them with scripts, and then you can use them across Postman. I can use it here as a parameter. I can use it in the URL as a path. I can set it in a header if I need to. I can use it in my authorization, and I can also use them in my scripts. So I can get variables, I can get environments. So say I want to get var name, I can get it here, and I can set a variable to equal it here and grab it from the environments. So that gives you full control over how you set, how you control, and how you use those variables.
Okay, yeah, so I understand now. So to summarize this, basically we have like proper node environment, and we can set environment variables just as simply like as we set in the node, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Tim. And like before wrapping this up, we have one last question. Like we learned a lot today from like the workshop and all the sessions, but how can we go from here to master the Postman? Like, but how can we learn more of the Postman knowledge?
So, I mean, I always recommend our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, you can find the Postman channel. There's lots of videos here that'll walk you through different concepts. We have one gentleman named Valentine who creates this Valentine series. Very, very detailed. Introduce, basics of sending and authorization, basics on writing tests, some advanced writing tests. Here I mentioned chaining of API requests together. I mentioned that. So he's got a pretty sophisticated 6-part series that are going to walk you through all of the concepts that you need. And then when it comes to the union fashion, you can find those under here under webinar. I've done all of those right here. There's a 3-part series, our enterprise e-commerce. Here's part 1. I think here's part 1, here's part 2, part 3. But I walk through building and testing your APIs, deploying and monitoring, and then going public and bringing it to market using this union fashion demo, wherever it went, this one. And so it's all publicly available, and you can find the videos here. So I recommend spending time on YouTube learning from our videos, because Valentine's way better at walking through all the details than I am. And start there. And then when you have questions, me and my team, we spend all day here, Joyce and Arlemy and all of us, answering questions. So if you have any questions, you can just answer a new topic here, and we're more than happy to answer the questions. And then also the community really steps up and does a lot of help. So between YouTube and the Postman community, you should be able to find what you're looking for.
Yeah, Tim, we have one more question. I think it's very interesting, so like we can take this. Okay, what's the recommended flow while developing APIs in Postman, which includes steps like documentation, monitoring APIs, etc. Basically, what is the industry standard way of going from working on Postman? Like, not from the student point of perspective, but like an industrial standard.
Yeah, good question. So I would say there really isn't an industry standard. There are many ways you can develop an API, and while there's some common patterns such as Rust, GraphQL, and then there's formats like Swagger and OpenAPI that I showed you that help standardize how you do it. How you actually build it and deploy it, there are thousands of different ways that I see. And this really makes it difficult for helping explain this and helping students understand how to get started. Because you can deploy an API in different languages like Java or PHP or Python. You can deploy an API on Amazon or Google or Azure clouds or your own local server. So that makes it really difficult for me to help people understand that. But that's why Postman exists, is because Postman think of it as like a Swiss Army knife that's going to help you understand all of those parts and pieces. Now, with that said, that's what union fashion is is Union Fashion is meant to be a reference implementation that helps people see some common ways of doing it. And one of those things, and you can find this as the video on YouTube, is what's called API first. And API first is what I showed you here in Postman. It is first, before you build any application, you're building an API. That is API first. And then when we're building that API, we're building it design first, meaning I'm going to design it here as an open API. I'm going to mock it. I'm going to document it. And I'm going to share that with my developers who are building applications and make sure it does what they need it to do. They're going to iterate on that design. We're going to change things until this API does exactly what it should do. And once we have it doing that, we're going to write tests. That's why it's called a contract test. We're going to write tests that verify those inputs and those outputs. And so this process is one of the more sophisticated and standardized ways of delivering APIs. Is you define the contract, you mock that as a contract, you document it, you share it, you iterate on it, and then you write the contracts, the performance, and the security tests that make sure you're meeting your SLA. Once you have all of this, it's a functioning API. You can use it. It should do everything you need it to do. It's just not ready for production, meaning it can't handle thousands and thousands of API calls. But functionally, it should do everything you need it to do. So this, as a blueprint for API design first, this is what Postman would like to see, and other companies would like to see as a standard, but it's not. And I'm not gonna fool you into thinking it is, but it is a healthy practice and it is a healthy pattern you should think about.
Yeah, I totally understand like what you're saying, and like that's a great point. And from your answer, I got one more question from my side. Like you said, we have a proper blueprint after creating on the Postman. Okay, except the production level code where we have so many users, everything is working, right? Should be working. So is there any way in Postman from where we can test the production level? Basically, we can make a lot of API calls at the same time, so we can test concurrency and other things that we need in the production level code from the Postman. Like, is there a way to do that?
Well, I mean, if it's not exposed by an API, no, you can't test functionality that's not exposed as an API. But a mock API, you're going to have a certain amount of calls that you can make to a mock API before this server will only handle so many requests at a certain time before it'll just stop returning calls. So you can only go so far with this model, and once you're ready, you can then deploy this. There's ways, you can take this open API and you can import it into AWS API Gateway and launch an API there that's much more will accept as many calls as you're willing to pay for. But if the functionality is not accessible via an API path, you won't be able to test that functionality. And then if you don't have that functionality published somewhere that can handle the volume, you won't be able to test the volume that you want in a production environment. Does that get at what you're asking?
Yeah, that totally sums up. Like that totally solves my question. Okay, so thank you so much, Tim, for coming and giving us the insightful session on how we can use Postman and how it can help us in making things easier. Okay, we are very thankful for all the information, and you can have find time for this session. Okay, and really thank you so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate the questions. Great question. I will leave you with one. This is part of the Union Fashion. If I have these operational level collections, and you can find this on the GitHub repo, but if you want to actually then deploy one of these APIs, here's a deploy collection that will deploy your API to the AWS gateway, generates your Lambdas, and actually makes it so you can actually make calls to that API. There's a couple that do RDS or DynamoDB if you're familiar with Amazon, But this gives you a little taste at how you can now take what you built in Postman and actually deploy it to a server on Amazon. But I'll just leave you with that. And thank you, everyone, for your time. I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your workshop and event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So guys, the winner, thank you so much for coming, first of all. And we'd like to say that this was the last workshop DevFest 1.0, and we'll release the winner of the GeeksforGeeks DSA course by tonight 11 p.m. on our Insta page. You can find the link of our Insta page in the description. Okay, go there and follow us, and we'll release the winner by 11 p.m. tonight. Thank you so much for coming.